Hello, I'm Bernard Hickey from interest.co.nz, and here we've got a special from Parliament in Wellington where we've just interviewed Bill English, the National Party's finance spokesman. If National wins the election come November, he will be the finance minister. And so I asked him, how should the government help the Reserve Bank deal with very strong inflation and also a slowing economy? So we've got a stagflationary threat hitting the economy with high prices and also a slowdown in the economy. How do you think a government should act when we've got this sort of stagflationary problem?
Well, I wouldn't go so far as calling it stagflation just yet, but there's no doubt we've got a hangover from the party of the last 8 or 10 years, and I think we're realising now that quite a bit of that prosperity was debt-fuelled, particularly for householders, and also that government ate up a fair bit of it. So the job of getting through the downturn and back onto a growth path is going to be about undoing the imbalances. So for households, you can see them doing that now. They're tightening up, they've got to meet high interest rates as well as high food and fuel prices, but they've also got to get their debt down. So there's going to be that's going to take a while. People's incomes hopefully will keep growing, which will give them the room to face the extra costs they've got, plus get their debt down and get a bit less exposed. And the adjustment in house prices is going to be is really sharpening up everyone's attitude about their debt levels and about how they've actually been financing what they're spending.
So how could the government help its friend at the Reserve Bank? There was often this phrase, the Reserve Bank needs all the friends it can get. How could the government, under a national lead government, help the Reserve Bank to fight this inflation?
Well, in some respects, the government's already done its worst. I mean, you've now got a period where government spending's been growing at 8 or 10% per year, faster than the economy, even faster than households. That's been financed not from debt, but from taxes that have just kept going up. So you can't undo that. We're all carrying that cost now. It's one of the reasons interest rates have stayed higher for longer. So when you look ahead, there's a number of things government can do. One is that it looks like tax cuts might actually help with filling some of the hole that households are experiencing. But it's almost more important that we get the structure of any tax cuts right for the long term. The next thing I think a government can do is look very carefully at its own sphere of activity, because it's still about 20% of the real economy and of its real activities, and that is going to need line by line scrutiny, because you've had 9 years where there's been plenty of money, the attitudes have got pretty relaxed, there's been no focus on productivity. The best thing a government can do for the economy in the next 5 years to beat that inflation problem is to get its own productivity up, and that is going to take quite a shift in direction.
Do you see any low-hanging fruit for the government to pluck in terms of reducing those costs?
Well, there's been a lot of focus on individual items, and look, there'll be hundreds of those through a system that's run fat for 9 years. I think the low-hanging fruit actually is a change in attitude, and we're seeing that in the public. We haven't seen it in government, and you're not going to get it until you change the government. And it's an attitude that says a taxpayer's dollar is precious, they've worked hard for it. If they're giving it to the government, it means they've got less to pay the school fees and the higher interest rate they're on, and so we should treat that with real care and make sure it's doing what the taxpayer gave it to us to do, which is to protect vulnerable people and to provide efficient services for households and families.
The Reserve Bank Governor said today that he wasn't too worried about the budget spend up and the tax cuts because it would help him to fight a slowing economy. It appeared that he was giving a bit of a green light for tax cuts. Does this make it easier for National to offer bigger tax cuts?
Well, the Reserve Bank Governor's focused very much on the shorter term. He's got a 2 or 3 year horizon. He's got to comply with his agreement, and he's finding that pretty hard. It happens that the bad news is the good news. There may be a bit more room, the green light as you say, but that only arises because the according to his forecast, the economy is tanking pretty badly. So that's putting people, it would put people out of work or drive down confidence, drive down house prices. So the good news is the bad news. I think that's more important really to look through a downturn. This is at the level of government policy, to focus on what can be done to lift our growth path as we get through it. And we're pretty optimistic that you have a resilient economy. It went through a lot of reform through the 80s and 90s. It's got a lot of flexibility. It's handled some fairly big pressures like a high exchange rate for quite a long time, and now the big oil prices, and now a downturn. So we want to focus on, say with tax, getting the tax structure right, as well as delivering a bit of cash in the shorter term. We've got to get our infrastructure processes sorted out. We've got to get effective government going again, so that 3 to 5 years on, as this economy picks up, the potential is 4 to 5% rather than 2 to 3.